One of the most common questions I'm asked about the oldest Anarchy server in Minecraft is whether or not it was better in the old days. 2b2t as a server has become so infamous that it has its own Wikipedia article. It's hard to find Minecraft players that haven't at least heard of it before. Starting in 2016, YouTube's influence on the server changed it forever. Was the server truly better before its widespread fame? As someone who was a 2b2t player long before becoming a YouTuber, I feel I can offer a unique perspective on this. The truth is that the old 2b2t and the modern one are so vastly different in certain ways that it's difficult to compare the two, like comparing apples to oranges or melons to kelp. So instead, I've compiled a list of ways the old 2b2t was better, and also a few ways it was actually worse. This is going to be an interesting video to say the least. Before we get started today, I see a lot of YouTubers just starting out and making 2b2t content, and that's great, but all I see is uncut footage with a music track over it, no editing at all. If you're new to editing and are looking for an easy solution, Filmora is your best bet. It is the best entry-level editing software available. Personally, I've been video editing for 15 years and can say that Filmora is the most beginner-friendly software I've seen. It's easy to create titles, drop in music, fade in and out, and renders in the format of your choice so that you can easily upload your video to YouTube. It's easy to learn and won't require you to read tutorials for 8 hours. It is free to download, but if you enjoy it and want to take it even further, it's only $59.99. That is insanely cheap for quality video editing software, and once you pay, the license is yours forever. To download Filmora for yourself, I've left a link in the description below, and thank you to Filmora for sponsoring today's video. With that being said, let's begin. The first reason the old 2b2t was better is pretty obvious: no queue. Players attempting to join the server for the first time these days often find themselves waiting long periods of time just to get in. The queue has become almost as famous as the server itself. In the first 6 years of 2b2t's lifespan, there was no queue. Since the average player count rarely went above 20 or 30 during peak hours, there was no reason to have one. You could log in at any time of day and just play, like a normal Minecraft server. 0-0 was actually safe. In the old days, spawn itself was only dangerous if you were a new player trying to escape. If you were fully established, it was pretty common to be able to explore spawn without fear of being attacked. Even if you were attacked, because 1.8 PvP and below didn't have end crystal combat, all it took was a few ender pearls to escape your opponent if you didn't feel like fighting. 0-0 was a great place to meet fellow travelers, swap stories, and even begin to recruit for groups to test the trustworthiness of people. In fact, hanging out at 0-0 is how I became friends with many of my eventual basemates on the server, and is what allowed me to get into larger group bases such as Asgard 2. Of course, it wasn't completely safe, especially during times like incursions, but it was overall much safer in the old days. Nowadays, just standing at 0-0 is pretty risky, as you'll always have someone trying to kill you even if you're fully geared. Such is life on a modern-day Anarchy server. Before YouTube, 2b2t's community was never very big. It was always a niche. The active player base on a day-to-day basis was small enough that you would easily recognize the majority of the names online. It was easier to get to know people and establish friendships. This tightly knit community also made it easier to blacklist griefers and troublemakers from social circles. And if you were a griefer, it was easier to find people that had the same mindset as you, though griefing groups usually ended up betraying each other given enough time. Having a tightly knit community, however, was a double-edged sword, but I'll talk about that later in the video. 2b2t used to have a party chat feature, where you could chat in-game with your allies. You have to remember that in the early to mid-2010s, things like Discord didn't exist yet, and there was no truly dedicated place for 2b2t players to communicate and coordinate. So party chat made it way easier for allies to interact without making it public. You just had to make sure that everyone involved knew how to use it properly, and many groups had a rule that you weren't allowed to type coordinates of any kind in party chat. because mistyping the command would mean leaking coordinates to the whole server. Overall, Party Chat was a fun feature that made communication more meaningful without reliance on external applications. I wish the server's admin, Housemaster, would bring it back. In modern 2b2t, anything that gets built less than 100,000 blocks away from spawn usually gets found after a few months. This is because there are just so many players traveling through the overworld at any given time. In the old days, because the active player base was so small, bases could last longer without being found and destroyed just by travelers. To give you an idea of how safe things used to be, I had an underground spawn bunker that I would frequent whenever I was in the spawn region. I used it to re-equip myself during my spawn escapades. It lasted from 2013 all the way up to the YouTube invasion in 2016, without being griefed. How far away from spawn was it? 4,000 blocks. It lasted 3 years, underground, only 4,000 blocks away from spawn. Something like this would never last that long in modern day 2b2t. The days of being able to hide bases so close to spawn are now long gone. So now that I've told you some of the things that I miss about the old 2b2t, let me tell you about the things that I don't miss about it. Because old 2b2t was actually awful in quite a few ways. But if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. We just hit 700,000 subscribers this week, so thank you for your continued support. Now then, one aspect of the old 2b2t that I don't miss was the server's instability. While the queue today is seen as an annoyance, it is used to generate funds to pay for the expensive hardware the server runs on. Originally, Housemaster relied on player donations to keep the server running. The overall cost came to about $90 a month. Because not a lot of people would play on the server at any given time, there was no reason to have more powerful hardware. Plus, at this point, the map file size was still measured in gigabytes, not terabytes, so cost-wise it was still manageable. But if there was an issue with the server, it would often take weeks to fix. I remember specifically back in 2014, there was a good 4-week period where the server was lagging and rubber banding so badly that it was essentially unplayable, even with only a handful of players online. It was rough. It wasn't uncommon to see the server's player count at 1 or even 0 when these issues sprang up. There would also be times where the server just wasn't online for days at a time. It was occurrences like this that kept 2b2t's player base small. You can't grow your player base when your server is broken half the time. The overall gameplay experience of today's 2b2t is far better than what it was in the old days. Before 2b2t was known as the oldest anarchy server in Minecraft, it was simply known as the world's worst Minecraft server. You didn't stumble upon this place by accident. You had to go out of your way looking for it. 2b2t was the server you played on when no other server would take you. Because of its history being rooted in 4chan culture, it attracted an incredibly toxic group of people that would often take acts too far. Now, I'm not going to name names, but allow me to tell you some of the awful things that happened during this era. Player doxings were rampant if you didn't have your personal info on lockdown. A prominent female 2b2t player became the target of harassment to the point where someone showed up at her house, took a picture of her front door, and then sent it to her in-game, threatening her. Another 2b2t player was harassed at his place of employment once his info was discovered. That's only the tip of the iceberg. I'm not going to delve further into it, but that should give you an idea of how toxic players were in the old days. The YouTube invasion meant an influx of players, but many of them were far less toxic than the old player base, effectively driving many of the bad apples away. Now, something that gets taken for granted by the modern player base is the vast highway systems that have been built by players all across the server. Modern day 2b2t has numerous groups dedicated to building and maintaining roads, making travel far easier. In the old days, this infrastructure didn't really exist. Getting to a distant location on the server meant having to dig a tunnel in the nether by yourself. The major access highways didn't go as far as they do today. Plus, there were no Elytra or Entity speed hacks in the early days, so travel took a very long time. The mass influx of players because of YouTube ended up creating great amounts of infrastructure that still benefit the server to this day. I know I've only listed a few things in this video today, but overall, was old 2B2T better? Like I said, it was better in some ways and worse in others. But the true Anarchy experience it provides has remained unchanged since day one. It is still the Minecraft server with no rules and complete freedom. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to subscribe. Also make sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram to stay updated on when new content is coming out. That's it for today, everyone. Take it easy and stay alive out there, Fit Fam.